We're sitting here with Rabbi Dr. Michael Lerner, the founder and editor of Tikkun magazine, and more recently the founder of the Network of Spiritual Progressives. And we're here to talk about Generosity Sunday and the strategy of generosity as a means towards achieving greater national security, and in particular the Global Marshall Plan as an important part of that strategy. Welcome, Dr. Lerner.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. You're one of our national organizers for the Network for Spiritual Progressives, and I'm delighted to be able to talk with you and through you to many of the people in our network and to others who want to know more about it.
So this upcoming weekend is Generosity Sunday. Could you tell me a little bit about what inspired you to organize this nationwide event?
The fundamental idea is that there are two ways of achieving security for our country.
Okay.
One is the idea that you can achieve security by dominating everybody and having power over everyone. The other idea that is less in vogue today, but which we want to revive, is that you can achieve security by having good relationships with other people. And so we think that the core of that is the spirit of generosity. We need to orient towards people with an attitude that says, hey, my well-being depends on your well-being, and that I care just as much about you as I care about me. Now that is a big leap for a lot of people who've grown up in a world that says, look out for number one, take care of yourself, screw the others, get power over them. But it's the kind of leap that we need in order to survive in the 21st century. We need a whole new orientation towards the world that says that our well-being depends on the well-being of everybody else on the planet.
Okay. So what specifically can we do to implement the strategy of generosity?
Well, we can do what we call the Global Marshall Plan. The Global Marshall Plan has several parts. One part is to change our trade arrangements with the world so that instead of them benefiting us and hurting billions of people on the planet, we need to have trade arrangements that work out in favor of the well-being of everyone. The second thing we can do is to dedicate between 1.5 and 5% of our gross domestic product every year for the next 20 to once and for all end global poverty, homelessness, hunger, inadequate education, inadequate health care, and eliminate and repair the damage done to our global environment. And if we do that, we could once and for all establish a whole different relationship to the world, because they would see us as generous and caring about them, and we in turn would reorient the way we're thinking about people. Instead of thinking that everybody is scary, we'd suddenly find ourselves in a world in which there was a lot of caring and generosity going on.
And I'm guessing that, the Global Marshall Plan, the idea of it comes from the Marshall Plan following the Second World War. Could you say more about that connection?
Yeah, the United States used between 1.5 and 2% of its gross domestic product at that time to fight what it feared to be the domination of communism in Europe. And the way it did it was to rebuild the war-torn countries of Western Europe. And everybody acknowledges that it was a huge success, and that in doing that, it was able to change the attitude of many, many people in Europe who were very hostile to us at first. That changed as a result of the generosity that we showed by rebuilding their economies. So that is a model for what we can now do for the whole rest of the world.
Where did the political will come from following the Second World War to be so generous?
Well, really it came from some very wise people in the government, because the country itself was confused as to what to do. And there were some who wanted to just withhold and take care of ourselves. We've been giving enough, they said, to the rest of the world. And then there was this other approach that said, no, we have to worry about what's going on in other parts of the world. And that other approach became dominant because there was leadership that would articulate that. Today we don't have that leadership, and that's why we need a network of spiritual progressives to put forward these ideas in the world, to challenge even the Democratic Party and the liberal and progressive forces who talk about what they're against in the war in Iraq. They want to take the troops out, they're right, totally right, and we're totally behind that, but they don't have a positive vision. And so they're easily caricatured as being concerned only about saving our own necks and not worrying about what's going on in the rest of the world. And that's why the appeal of the Republicans saying, oh, they're cutting and running, still has some resonance with people. What we need is an alternative vision that isn't just about taking care of ourselves, but actually is about caring for the rest of the world.
So you mentioned that the Global Marshall Plan has several different dimensions. So I was wondering if you could speak more about those different dimensions.
Yes, well, I've talked about trade arrangements and I've talked about the giving of money. But it's very important for us to recognize that giving money isn't enough. There has to be a different kind of spirit in the way that we do this and how we do it than has been done in the past. Because many people will say, oh, well, we've been giving money to third world countries and it hasn't worked. So the first thing we have to recognize is that we can't dump money onto corrupt regimes or onto undemocratic regimes. And in those societies, in those countries, we're very interested in working through non-governmental organizations, the so-called NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and in religious or spiritual communities, and in secular communities, to provide any form of direct aid that will actually reach the people. Second thing, part of our program is we need to do it in an ecologically sensitive way. In other words, we're not simply wanting to make sure that every country in the world can build the newest form of automobile that's going to pollute the world, right? We want to develop forms of industrialization and forms of modernization that are consistent with preserving the planet, not destroying the planet. The third thing is we need to do it in a way that is culturally sensitive to the varieties of people on the planet and not simply going with the attitude that we know best and you know nothing, that we are the smart ones because we have more money. The fact that we have more money doesn't mean that we're better or smarter. It just means we know how to get money, we know how to get power, but there are a lot of other values. So that talks to the cultural sensitivity, but also to a fundamental ruling principle of the way to do this, which is that we have to do it with a spirit of modesty and humility. We can't come to the world saying, hey, we're the big guys, we know everything. No, we don't know everything, and in fact, we want to learn from you. So yes, we want to share our finances and our technological capacities, but we also want, as part of this Global Marshall Plan, to bring some of the cultural richness of the world to our own country. We want an exchange in which you will teach us some of the values that led you to not be a dominator and a controller of others, that led you to have a culture that could live in peace with others, that led you to cultures that affirm more of kindness and generosity, where that's true. We want to validate them and not act as though we have a superior culture just because we have superior money. So these are elements of the plan that will make it very different from the ugly American coming in there and telling the world what to do.
Okay.
Now, everything that we are calling for in the Global Marshall Plan is meant to apply to the United States as well. That is, we want to eliminate global poverty. We want to do it here as well as everywhere else. We're part of the globe. So the Global Marshall Plan will use its funds not only around the world, but also in the United States to once and for all end poverty, to once and for all end homelessness, to once and for all establish a decent healthcare system.
Okay. Where can somebody find out more about the Global Marshall Plan if they wanted to?
Well, first of all, we have a fairly sophisticated articulation of it, both in The Left Hand of God and in the Tikkun magazine. And in each issue of Tikkun...
This is the March-April 2007 issue?
Yes, and you can also find this on the web at www.tikkun.org. But in every issue of the magazine, we are developing and refining it. So we shouldn't talk about this as though it were a finished product. Right. We are in the process of refining and developing each part of it so that all the questions for each country get resolved and answered. And for that, our movement is seeking to involve people to engage in that conversation about how to do that in every sphere of life. We want to work with everyone who wants to do input, give us good input on how to refine and develop the Global Marshall Plan so that it can answer everyone's questions. So that's sort of what we're about. It's a very large picture. People can read about it at our website, www.spiritualprogressives.org, and in my book, The Left Hand of God. But ultimately, this is something that any human being can talk about, and anybody watching this. This is not our idea. We want it to be your idea.